Good morning, Facebook friends. Helen Archontou here, CEO of the YWCA of Northern New Jersey. So happy to have some time with you today. TGIF, we made it through another week. And sometimes we really need to pat ourselves on the back for that, especially these days. We're juggling a lot, for sure. And between working remotely for some of us or working, out in our offices, taking care of family, managing homeschooling, whatever's going on in your house, taking care of a loved one, it's a lot. So, great job. You made it through another week, and hopefully this weekend you can spend a little time re-energizing and doing a little bit of self-care and reflecting on, good that you did and planning a little bit for yourself for the week ahead. I am excited about today, though. We've had such a full, wonderful week at YWTV, great conversations for sure. But today, it's nice because we're going to get to talk a little bit about one of our sheroes. And, we don't always take the time to do that as much as we should. And it really does help us create some perspective when we look back, help us look forward. And so I'm so grateful that we get to do that today. Today, we're going to spotlight an iconic woman that I'm hoping you know her name, but if you don't, we're going to definitely fill in the blanks and educate you today on Alice Paul. She was born in 1885, and her legacy and life work was around what the YWCA is all about and what I personally have devoted my life to, and I know my guest today has as well, which is gender equality. She was one of the main leaders and strategists of the campaign for the 19th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, which prohibits sex discrimination in the right to vote. And, there was a lot of conversation about that last year, especially because there was a big historic anniversary around that. But there's a lot more to Alice Paul, and we're going to learn a little bit about that today. Her birth home, which is here in New Jersey, is a historic site, and it is called the Alice Paul Institute, and it's also a private nonprofit 501c3 corporation, and it's located in Mount Laurel. And I love to share other wonderful nonprofits in our community. We all survive on the support of our donors and funders and volunteers, and this is another great organization for you to consider adding to your list if it's not already on there. And so we're going to learn all about it today from their program director, Miss Alyssa Hunt. Welcome, Alyssa. So happy to have you with us.
Thank you so much for inviting me, Helen. I'm really pleased to be here. I love talking about Alice and her work and legacy. That is my life's work now too.
That's wonderful. And before we do that, I want to tell our viewers about you. So Alyssa and her role at the Alice Paul Institute has really brought her back to the nonprofit sector after several years of working as a chef and a childcare professional. I'm sure Alice Paul can attest to all the many roles that we all hold in our life and how we bring all of those skills together for our activism. So wonderful to have you back in the field, Alyssa. She holds a bachelor degree in literature with a minor in writing from St. Edward's University in Austin, Texas, where I'm sure it's a lot warmer today than it is here in New Jersey. She pursued a graduate studies in folklore at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. She's fascinated with history and the narrative and ways in which we cultivate the meaning of the stories we inherit and the ones we tell about our lives and our communities. She's thrilled to apply those passions to both continuing the established programming at Alice Paul Institute, as well as evolving and developing new ways for women of all ages to engage with themselves as active history changers and history makers. Well, it sounds like from your background that you are exactly in the right place for what you have studied. So wonderful to have you on our show, and wonderful to have you at Alice Paul Institute. As I shared with Alyssa when we were connecting, I've been following the Alice Paul Institute for years on social media. We're going to make sure that you have all the links to be able to do it as well. And, there's always just wonderful information about history and wonderful programming when you do get to do that. And recently I was noting and following that it was Alice Paul's birthday. And there was so much great information that I wanted to invite Alyssa to join us today, because Alice is really a shero. And, someone that we stand on her shoulders for sure. And this is a wonderful opportunity to be able to talk a little bit about her. So with that, let's start doing it. So tell us who Alice Paul was. Let's start there, Alyssa.
Sure. So Alice Paul was a Quaker. It was really, really important to her life and to her work. We are housed at Paulsdale, the farm where she grew up, that was built in 1800. And I'm not there right now, unfortunately. But it is this incredible space where you get this real sense of history and of what helped shape her into the woman she became. So Alice was born into a Quaker family on this big working farm. And this is important because Quaker values informed her life and work so much. These ideals of gender equality, which was not necessarily a very common thing in 1885, to be raised as a young girl saying, well, of course you can have an education, of course you can have a career. And this idea that goes with Quakerism as well, of nonviolence, and that you have an individual mandate from God to make the world a better place, to fight injustice, and to leave a mark for good. And so Alice was this woman who grew up with all of these narratives that are still radical in certain circles today, just being like really hammered into her. Her grandfather was a founder of Swarthmore College, and her mother went to Swarthmore, and it was just kind of expected that she would as well. Alice ended up having 6 degrees in her lifetime.
Wow.
And so yeah, we talk about the 6 degrees of Alice Paul a lot. So she went to Swarthmore and she studied science, but then she ended up going to what is now Columbia University to study social work. And she looked around her and saw all these people who just had so much need. And after spending some time working on her social work degree there and working in these settlement houses, she came to realize that you can give people food and clothes all day long and all year long, and that doesn't do anything to address the issue that they need food and clothes, that there's something deeper that is keeping them from having that. And so she went to England to try to get a deeper understanding in a Quaker social work settlement house organization. And when she was there, she met the Pankhursts, who were the very famous British suffragettes, who were the militant branch of the women's suffrage question, as she said in a letter to her mother. And she started to say, well, maybe the reason that so many people are not having their needs met is because half of the population doesn't have any say in shaping policies that determine whose needs get met. And so she started throwing bricks and making, as was kind of the joke, but she did. She said it wasn't against her nonviolent principles because property isn't people's lives, and that the true violence was that people were not able to have a voice, that women had no franchise. So Alice got very radicalized, and she came home and jumped right back into schooling and started organizing with the National American Women's Suffrage Association, or NASA. And she'd been doing organizing in England, and then she came home and threw together the big suffrage parade, which is kind of one of the things she's most famous for. So Alice, I guess I'm kind of ranging all over the place. Yeah. I know she was a really shy Quaker farm girl who just wanted to sit under her favorite beech tree, which we still have on the property, and read. But she felt the challenge of history was like at her door and said, well, I can't just be quiet. I can't just do nothing now that I know that this is the issue. And so she hated being in the spotlight. She did not like public speaking, but she was standing on the street making speeches about how women needed equal rights, which I just find so inspiring.
I do too. And I love, I feel like it's like story time. I love what you're sharing with us, because it just shows, the depth, of this woman. And also it's such an amazing message, because I think so many women, even to this day, I mean, so when you think about this from the perspective of inspiring our current actions and activities, so many of us, maybe seeing things happening around us right now that feel unjust and feel wrong, but it may not feel like it's our nature to be an activist or to take action, because we are a quiet soul, or, someone, like Alice, who, really enjoys books and kind of stays in their part of the world. So, but it also gives such a wonderful model for that you can do and be both.
We love,
yeah,
we love talking about Alice's friend, Lucy Burns, for this exact reason. Alice was in jail in England. She'd been arrested for protesting for the right to vote. And she met this woman named Lucy, who was also from the Mid-Atlantic, who was also in England joining up with the suffragists. And Lucy loved being center stage. And so there's this great picture we have at Paulsdale of Lucy in a little biplane, because they printed these "Why Women Should Have the Vote" leaflets. And whereas Alice was, for such a bold woman, she was also fairly meek in her social engagements. And so Lucy said, "Oh, I'll do it." And they sent her up in an airplane, and she just dropped leaflets all over DC.
Wow. And it's amazing also, I remember last year, before the world shut down, especially, when we still early in the year when people were in person together, I went to a few, our League of Women Voters of Northern Valley and our League of Women Voters of Essex County. I went to a couple events where people were talking about the 100th anniversary of the women's right to vote. And they had a lot of reenactments, of this time. And I was so struck listening to them. And of course, being a modern day activist and just thinking about what they were able to accomplish and how creative they were, considering their resources and tools, when you think about them compared to what we have today, were, we would think non-existent. And yet they were effective, and they had ways that they were able to get their message out. So that's wild, thinking about that, she flew in a plane and dropped down.
Well, they were so creative. And they would use, in the same way that, there's Feminista Jones wrote a book. She was speaking at a big event we had last night. And she wrote a book about Black women activists changing the world. I think it's called From the Tweets to the Streets. And so you think about social media and how social media has been revolutionary in driving all of this change that's happened over the past decade around the world. But pop culture has always been leveraged as a tool. That was, there's a great program that called Songs of the Suffragists that I can't remember which one of the Leagues of Women Voters in North Jersey, New York has put together. Some women wrote, Lori Englehart, I think is her name, wrote this book about the way that they would take nursery rhymes and popular songs and so tunes that everyone knew that just get stuck in your head, and they would change the lyrics to talk about how women needed the vote. And it's just, and cookbooks were another really big way that the suffragists leveraged sort of popular media and culture to get their message out. There's a book by Laura Kumin called All Stirred Up. And it's about the way that, because circulars and recipe catalogs were really popular in the late 1800s. And so they would they would work these like recipes for subversion, is what another way I've heard them called, into these circulars that would go around and kind of just drop little things about women's liberation and women's political agency into recipes for baked breakfast tomatoes.
That's amazing. That's amazing. And thank you for sharing those book titles and because I know our viewers will definitely be interested. I know I'm going to go seek some of those out. That's so fascinating. So tell us a little bit about how she, obviously she had her 6 degrees and as you shared, and she had her trajectory, but how did she get linked to her interest in the involvement of the 19th Amendment? Like, how did her evolution get her there?
Well, her mom was a suffragist. She wasn't militant, but part of that Quaker philosophy that's rooted in gender equality, because Quakers believe that everyone has a divine inner light, that God shines through the individual, and therefore gender isn't significant because we are all, touched by that divine light. And so she would go to Morristown suffrage meetings with her mother as a little girl. And she was the oldest of 4 children. And she took, she had her chores around the house, and she took a lead in helping with her siblings and helping with farm work and just all of the kind of things that made up the daily life of even a well-to-do, which they were fairly well-to-do, but a well-to-do farm child. And so for her, there was never a question of whether or not women deserved equal rights or had that entitlement. But she went to England, like I said, and just got really radicalized, was very inspired. I mean, the Pankhursts, Emmeline and Christabel and Sylvia Pankhurst, who were her 2 daughters, were incredible public speakers, incredible strategists. And so Alice, just kind of looking for something to do, really went to a meeting because she liked what she'd heard, and they had these, community meetings. And so she started going, getting to know them, and they recognized in her right away, just from the kinds of conversations they would have, that she had a tactical mind and that she cared enough that she was willing to go into uncomfortable spaces, like being a shy girl making a soapbox speech, which, the term soapbox really comes from, they would literally stand on a soapbox so it would raise them up above the sidewalk. And, some people get discouraged by people yelling at them or telling them they can't, but she was very stubborn. She was known for her stubbornness and intractability, really. And so people would drive by, people would throw these women into the gutters. They would drive by them on the streets in London and they would knock them down. They would throw things at them. They would try to run them off the road with their carriages. And that really emboldened her. It didn't discourage her at all. And so she learned all of these tactics and strategies from the Pankhursts in England. And she came home and actually really revolutionized protest. A lot of the tactics that we saw all across the country last summer, most of that came from Alice Paul. No one had ever picketed the White House before Alice Paul. No one had ever organized a women's march in Washington before Alice Paul. The idea of just almost like a sit-in, they called them the Silent Sentinels, just standing, and they stood in front of the White House for 9 solid months for 10 hours a day. No, that was all her ideas of the way that we can publicize ourselves.
That's amazing. It's wonderful to kind of create those, lines between what she did and what we see today. And I love you sharing about, as a child sitting and being in the room with her mother and, and that motivating her and that then being passed down. Over, the course of my work with the YW, I've had the absolute honor of talking to so many women leaders and women activists. And, one conversation, or I should say 2 conversations in particular that I'm thinking about right now, because you triggered me, were we had an event that we co-sponsored with the National Coalition of 100 Black Women called 50 Shades of Politics, trying to encourage women of color and Black women to run for office a few years ago. And we had some amazing Black women who are in office and that are leaders today, like Lieutenant Governor Oliver and Assemblywoman Sumter and Senator Gill and Senator Cunningham and Councilwoman Ridley, Marilyn Davis, Tara Dowdell. It was all, amazing, strong women. And almost every one of them talked about how their mothers brought them to activities that were service related and, civic rooted. And that's where it was started for them. And, I'm a mom of 7-year-old twins, a boy and a girl. And I think about that a lot about, because I want my children, that's one of my hopes, is that, they are grow up with an interest in activism and service for sure. And it's wonderful to hear that that's, part of how it starts historically and still in present day. So I appreciate you sharing that. So let's talk a little bit about some of the lasting impacts of her work. Obviously, we know the 19th Amendment, is definitely one place, but we know that her impact is definitely, far, much more far-reaching than that. Yeah, can you share a little bit?
Sure. Well, as soon as Alice Paul, put down her glass for toasting the ratification of the 19th Amendment on August 26, 1920, she went straight back to work and she wrote the Equal Rights Amendment. And she spent the next 50 years working to get it ratified, which this might be the year. We've got resolutions to remove the time limit. So hopefully we will see that work happen. We'll see her work completed. There's this great quote from Alice. She said, "Well, my mother always told me that when you pick up the plow, you don't put it down again until you reach the end of the row." And she carried that through. I mean, there was her impact was so far reaching. Most other developed nations have an equal rights amendment in their constitutions, like Japan does, because someone met her. And then after World War II ended, when they were retooling their own constitution, they made sure to include it because Alice Paul had influenced them. She organized the World Women's Party and worked in Switzerland for a long time. She actually was personally responsible for saving a number of Jewish families who she met while she was in Europe during the 1940s. She would take Jewish refugee families from Germany and house them in her headquarters in Switzerland, and then help secure them visas to get back to the United States. The name is escaping me right now, but there's a family who I think still has a family farm in South Jersey. And they survived because of Alice Paul, because she's in a lot of context, she's depicted as being kind of a hard woman. And in certain ways she was, like I said, intractable, but her heart was so big. And she wanted, well, she was a self-proclaimed militant. She wanted equality and she was willing to do whatever it took to get it. But I think that sometimes she isn't as humanized as she could be. And I love stories like that because they're important, to that family, but to history, but also just because they show like a human woman who had compassion, who wasn't just this eye on the prize with blinders on, equal rights in a political sense, but a person who saw other people, who had like real relationships and cared about them. But, I was talking about her kind of shyness. Before her death, Alice Paul went through all of the papers of the National Women's Party, which was the organization she formed after she left NASA, and that she was working in when they got the 19th Amendment passed. And she basically culled them for any mention of her private personal life because, she didn't want to be a hero. She didn't want women's rights and the movement for gender equality to be about her. She wanted it to be about the mission. She's, in her mind, she only mattered to it in that she was a woman who deserved rights just like every other woman deserves rights. We don't know a whole lot about her personal life after she left college, when she after 1910, 1911, there's not a lot of data out there about who she was internally, because for her, it was so it was outward focused, and she didn't want people to think about her and put her on any kind of pedestal.
Yeah, her focus was the greater picture. It's funny, you're talking and it's reminding me, thinking of Stacey Abrams, and how, obviously she had a her own experience and how she could have taken her next life step, but she chose to really focus on voter suppression as an issue and not make it about her. And it's a wonderful, it's a clearly a sacrifice, for sure. But it's definitely a model, that does show tremendous impact, when someone is able to step and, look at the greater picture, the greater good, and go from there. So tell us a little bit about your building. I mean, it's the Institute is a historic landmark, but it's not a museum, right? It's
no, it is not a museum. So yeah,
hear a little bit about
we're part of the 4% of National Historic Landmarks that honor women, which is just a horrifying number, I think. And we are the only one in the region that's open to the public. Definitely in New Jersey, we're the only National Historic Landmark in New Jersey that honors a woman that you can visit publicly. But no, we are not a museum. We actually, we are in the house Alice grew up in, but we only have one thing that belonged to her. It's a bookshelf because she loved to read, but there's nothing else of Alice's in the house. We don't view history as something static and in the past. And that's such an important message, I think, and such an important part of who Alice was. Alice wouldn't have wanted a museum. So we say that we are an example of adaptive reuse of a historic site. We do a lot of programming out of the Alice Paul Institute. And we do have a permanent exhibit, like an interpretive story that talks about Alice's life and talks about her life's work. It talks about her family and the historicity of the space. But it focuses much more on the suffrage struggle and then on her work establishing the World's Women Party and the Equal Rights Amendment, which hopefully will be the 28th.
Yeah.
But our offices are there. We operate out of it, but you can come visit. You can tour the house. You can have a picnic on the beautiful, expansive 6-acre grounds. But the idea is that we honor her legacy by continuing her work. So we run our Girls Leadership Council, which is a space for teen girls to come together every month and talk about issues affecting women and girls in the country and around the world, and developing leadership skills and finding their own voice and figuring out how they're going to change the world. And we have field trips for local schools, and other organizations, kind of like Kiwanis, comes and meets there. And we just try to make it a space that honors Alice's legacy by making sure other people have the resources and tools to keep doing this important work.
Well, that's wonderful. And for our viewers, just know we're attaching links for you to their website and to their social media. And as I said, I've been following their social media for years, and there's just a lot of good stuff on there. So please, like it. They're on Twitter, they're on Instagram too, right? Mm-hmm. Facebook page. So, there's a lot of places and spaces that you can connect with the Alice Paul Institute, and their website, of course, and all of those places you can learn about their programming and what they have. So since we are living in kind of a remote world right now, and a lot of stuff is happening virtually, is there anything upcoming that you're doing in a virtual space that people can do, whether it's adults or for girls?
Oh yeah, that would be great. So we do two community programs every month. Sometimes we do more, but we always do our two. And the second Saturday of each month, usually, sometimes that changes, but usually it's the second Saturday. And we do programs that focus on history or advocacy or civics. And we're actually really excited for our second Saturday in February. We have the Disrupt Theater Company, which is from Lancaster, Pennsylvania, and it is founded by Black women, and they focus all of their programming on creating works that are by and about Black and Indigenous people of color and queer people. And they are really working to make sure that programming is always accessible, because financial barriers can be very real in the fine arts community. So that's why they're called the Disrupt Theater Company, because they're working to disrupt all these norms that make theater inaccessible to so many people. And they want to kind of be trailblazers in changing that. So Starlisha Michelle Gingrich, who's their founder, is going to be talking with us.
Wonderful. So what we'll do is we'll find a link to that, and we'll put it in the comments. That's a wonderful way. Black History Month coming up. We all of our organizations will have a lot of initiatives that are really focused on bringing attention to Black women and, their significant, clearly to this day, work that they're doing for, helping women as a whole. And wonderful, so much so that we can hopefully people will join from our viewers as well. I'm so grateful that you had some time today to share with us. And I'm sitting here listening to you thinking, wow, your folklore degree really paid off because you're a great storyteller. I really enjoyed talking with you and hearing everything that's going on. And it's exciting that you're there now. Look forward to seeing you continue the great work of the Alice Paul Institute and where you grow it to. As I shared with you, the YWCA of Northern New Jersey stands with you. We look forward to partnering with you and, sharing stories together and definitely standing together for important issues that I know, obviously work that Alice started, and we do want to see the Equal Rights Amendment, that's definitely be a focus from a advocacy perspective for all of us this year. So I look forward to rolling up our sleeves and figuring out how to work side by side on that. For our viewers, look, it's the weekend. It's a wonderful time to hear stories and share stories. So don't despair if you were not able to, if there's someone in your life that you wish had seen this broadcast. It's very easy to share. You can share from our Facebook page. You could share it with an individual into Messenger. You can copy it and put it onto your Facebook page so everyone can see it. You can copy the link and send it out in an email or a text. This was a great stories and inspiring. It's wonderful, as I said, to always look back from where we came and, give us so much perspective about going forward. And I'm, once again, as you were sharing, it just reinforced to me what I always believe when I hear stories about, women activists during this time. Again, how much they did, how much they accomplished, and with such different resources. And it does remind me that as much as, being an activist, today in our social justice work sometimes, can get challenging. If they could do it, we can do it for sure.
Absolutely.
and keep going.
Thank you for having me. It's been a real pleasure. And I also am looking forward to the things we're going to be able to do together.
Same. And so for our viewers, look, thank you for being with us all week. Again, so many great conversations, important conversations, and, ending on such a lovely high note. We have a lot of great conversations set for you next week, so stay tuned. I also want to share with you that we have a Friendship Friday event for our aging community, for the women in our community. Please join us on February 12th. It's to do something very important. It's a whole conversation about sharing your story and scrapbooking and journaling and sharing your life. I know I happen to be very grateful that I have my 90-year-old mother living with me during this time. And, we get to hear the stories regularly, and my children get to hear the stories. But it's wonderful to think about a way to capture those stories and memorialize them so that the same way Alyssa is able to share about Alice Paul's history, that you'll have your family history to share as well. So please join us. It's a free event from 11:30 to 12:30, virtual on Zoom, on sharing your stories, scrapbooking and journaling for our Friendship Fridays. And for all of our aging community and our seniors, as you know, we have our free senior fitness classes that happen every day of the week, whether it's chair yoga, Zumba, or Fit and Fabulous. It's a wonderful opportunity to keep your mind and your body going anytime, but especially at this time, it really helps break the social isolation to have that. And for the young women in your life, for the teens, we hope that they consider joining us on February 26th from 7 to 8:30. Our Gen network, which is our Girls Empowerment Network, will be having a wonderful conversation called The Color Complex, a nonprofit organization that we're partnering is coming in to talk about raising awareness on the impact of colorism in communities and around the globe. And it will help young women and young women of all races and from all of our various communities. We encourage them to come together We'll have some wonderful facilitators. And again, this will be hosted virtually. And they'll learn about perceptions, beliefs, values, about skin, hair texture, and features that can influence our behaviors and attitudes towards others. So we really encourage all the young women in our community in those teen years to join us for this important conversation. And mark your calendars. It's coming. It's coming. Keep a watch. Our Women's Leadership Conference, which is one of our signature, always sold out events. It'll be a little different this year. That was actually the last event that we had before the world shut down at the YWCA. We had about 150 women in the room hugging and lifted, and the following week, the world shut down. But we are still going to lift and inspire you. And we have some amazing women from around the state who are coming together. And this year we're doing a virtual conversation series. And over each week of March, we have a different woman that's going to have a little conversation with me to help all of you think about living your values in your everyday life, being authentic, and really pulling on your resilience and being your best self. So we look forward to you joining us for that. Stay tuned. Details are getting ready to launch next week. And as always, we encourage you to sign up for our 21-day Racial Equity and Social Justice Challenge. Really easy to do. Just send your email. The link will be here in the comments. Alyssa, you guys should get some of your folks to join us on the 21-day challenge as well. Every day for 21 days, you'll get a article, a podcast, a little video, and it'll give you an opportunity to learn about race, power, privilege, and reflect personally. You can join our Facebook group for discussion. We have over 600 people who have done it. We have so many organizations and businesses who have shared it within their entire structures. And it's a great way to learn and unlearn all the things that we need. So with that, we thank you for being with us this week. Thanks for listening to all of our updates. Have a wonderful week and stay healthy. Take a little time for yourselves. And Alyssa, thank you again for just, I feel just very light and lifted from our conversation, and I'm sure our viewers do as well. Thank you for sharing so many wonderful stories, and we look forward to hearing more.
Thank you. Have a great weekend, everyone. Enjoy the snow.
Yes. Buckle up. Bye.